There are times in life when we are tested, moments when the universe places before us an impossible choice, a situation that demands more than we thought we had to give. These moments reveal who we really are. This is the story of one of those moments. The year was 1871, and the land of Wyoming was as wild as it was beautiful. Deep canyons cut through the land like ancient scars. And the sky, vast and implacable, observed everything with the indifference that only nature knows. Nathaniel Cross was 36 years old and what they called a frontiersman. He traveled from place to place, working wherever there was work, always on the move. After losing the family farm to a fire 10 years ago, Nathaniel had taken what was left, a horse, some tools, the clothes on his back, and left. I'd never stopped anywhere long enough to call home. That September morning, he was crossing a canyon region on his way to a job driving cattle. The payment would be enough to spend the winter comfortably. He had been riding for a few hours when he heard something that made him stop. A faint sound, almost swallowed by the wind, but definitely real. A voice calling for help. Nathaniel dismounted and crawled to the edge of the canyon. What he saw made his heart sink. The canyon was deep, at least 100 feet. And there, stuck on a narrow ledge about 10 meters from the edge, was a young man. His skin was tanned, his black hair was covered in dust. His leather clothing immediately identified him as Shoshone. One of his arms was trapped under a rock, pinning him to the ledge that was no more than a meter wide. His face showed pain and exhaustion, but when he saw Nathaniel, his eyes shone with hope. Nathaniel assessed the situation. The only way to save him was to go down to him. The walls were steep, but there were ledges and cracks where hands and feet could find support. The problem was that Nathaniel was not an experienced climber. He glanced at his horse, tied a few feet away. In the saddlebags, there was a 15-meter rope. It wouldn't be enough to get to the ledge, but it would help with the hard part. It was a risky plan, with a huge chance of ending in tragedy. But Nathaniel wasn't the kind of man to ignore a cry for help. He tied the rope to a firm rock and began to descend. The first few meters were the easiest. The ledges were wide, the cracks deep. Nathaniel moved slowly, testing each hold. But as I descended, the wall became more treacherous. The bumps became smaller. His fingers began to ache, his muscles began to burn. Sweat ran down his face. He didn't look down. I knew that if I saw the abyss, I would lose my courage. When he reached the end of the rope, there were still 5 meters to the ledge. 5 meters without security, where one mistake would mean the end. Nathaniel took a deep breath and continued. The next few minutes were the longest of his life. Every move was a gamble. His fingers were bleeding from clinging to the rock. His arms were shaking, but he didn't stop. And finally his feet touched the ledge. The young Shoshone looked at him with wonder and gratitude. He said something that Nathaniel didn't understand, but whose meaning was clear. "Thanks for coming." Nathaniel surveyed the situation. The arm was trapped under a heavy rock. Not impossible to move, but the ledge was so narrow there was barely room to maneuver. He positioned his hands and pushed. The rock moved. 1 centimeter. 2. The young man pulled his arm away. The rock fell into the abyss, disappearing into the darkness. The arm was injured, but not seriously. The young man could move it. Now came the hardest part. Climb. Nathaniel explained the plan with gestures. He would climb first until he reached the rope. Then he would throw it to the young man, who would tie himself up and climb up while Nathaniel held him up there. The climb was agonizing. If the descent had been difficult, going up with your arms already at their limit was torture. When he finally reached the rope, Nathaniel almost cried with relief. He climbed the rest of the way and crawled over the edge, panting. But there was no time to rest. He threw the rope down. The young man tied himself up and began to climb. Each time he slipped, Nathaniel felt the pull and resisted, keeping the rope steady. It was a team effort, 2 strangers united by a rope and a will to survive. And finally, the young man's hand appeared on the edge. Nathaniel grabbed that hand and pulled with all his might. The young man rolled over the edge and lay next to Nathaniel, both exhausted but alive. Alive. When they finally recovered, the young man pointed to himself and said a name. Tavo. Nathaniel nodded. Nathaniel. It was then that Nathaniel realized the problem. His horse was gone. During the rescue, the animal must have gotten loose and escaped. And with him, gone were the saddlebags, the visions, belongings, everything Nathaniel had in the world. He stood still, absorbing reality. I had lost everything. The horse, the work I was going to do, the money I was going to earn, months of savings on tools and supplies, all because he stopped to help a stranger. A part of him felt angry, repentance. But that part only lasted a moment, because when he looked at Tavo, he saw a young man who had been trapped in that canyon for who knows how long, waiting for help that might never come. And now he was alive. I lived because Nathaniel chose to help. Some things were worth more than horses and supplies. Tavo touched Nathaniel's shoulder and pointed east. "My people," he said in hesitant English. "My village. There." Nathaniel didn't have many options, and there was something in Tavo's eyes that made him trust. Let's go. The journey to the Shoshone village took 3 days. Tavo was an excellent guide. I knew where to find water and food. I knew where it was safe to rest. Nathaniel watched and learned. And as they walked, he discovered that Tavo knew more English than he seemed. Simple sentences, loose words, enough to tell your story. Tavo was hunting when he fell into the canyon. The ledge saved his life, but the rock trapped his arm. It stayed there for 2 days before Nathaniel showed up. 2 days without water, no food, hopeless, and then someone came. On the 3rd night, they arrived at the village. It was a beautiful place in a valley between mountains. Dozens of tents along a river, horses grazing in green fields. When Tavo appeared, the reaction was immediate. People ran towards him. A woman hugged him tightly. An older man cupped her face and spoke words that brought tears. Tavo had been presumed lost. Scouts searched for days, but the trail ended at the edge of the canyon. They assumed the worst, and now he was alive, because of Nathaniel. Then Tavo told the story of the rescue, about the white man who went down the canyon without a rope, who risked his own life for a stranger, who lost everything he had to save him. When he finished, there was absolute silence. The older man approached Nathaniel and studied him for a long moment. Tavo translated his words. "My father says you saved his son, the most precious thing he has." Nathaniel blinked. "My father is the boss," Tavo explained, "the leader of our people. Tavo was not just a young hunter. He was the chief's son, the heir of the entire tribe. The boss, Washaki was his name, continued talking." Tavo translated, "He says you are welcome here. As long as you want to stay, you will have shelter, food, and protection." And then came the gifts. First, a horse. Not just any horse, but a magnificent stallion, better than Nathaniel could ever have purchased. Nathaniel tried to refuse. Washaki nodded past Tavo. "It is not present. It's justice. You lost your horse saving us. We are giving back what you sacrificed." Then came new tools, warm clothes, provisions for months. Everything Nathaniel had lost was replaced, and much more. But material gifts were only part of it. What really transformed Nathaniel was acceptance. For the first time in a decade, he belonged somewhere. The Shoshone welcomed him as family. They invited him to their meals, their celebrations, their conversations around the fire. They taught their traditions. And they listened when he shared his. Nathaniel discovered he had a lot to offer. His knowledge of the white world was valuable. His practical skills were useful. He was not just a recipient of kindness. He was a contributor, community member. He and Tavo became close friends. The young man showed the secrets of the land. Nathaniel taught what he knew. 2 worlds meeting through an unlikely friendship. And then, a year after the rescue, something unexpected happened. Nathaniel fell in love. Kamama was Tavo's sister, a 25-year-old woman with eyes that sparkled like stars. Curious about Nathaniel's world, she asked questions about the white people's cities, about their strange traditions. The friendship turned into something deeper. When Nathaniel asked for permission to court her, Washaki smiled. He said Nathaniel had proven his character when he saved Tavo, that a man who risked everything for a stranger could be trusted with a daughter. And I said yes. The wedding took place in the spring, a Shoshone ceremony full of dances, songs, and blessings. And when Nathaniel looked at Kimama, his wife, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Complete happiness. Nathaniel Cross lived to be 74 years old. He never left the Shoshone again. He built a life there. He had 3 children with Kamama. He became a respected advisor, translator, bridge between 2 worlds. When colonists arrived, he was the one who negotiated. When conflicts threatened, he was the one who looked for solutions. He protected his adopted people with the same determination as who went down that canyon. The night he left, surrounded by Kamama, his children, and Tavo, he was smiling. Tavo held his hand and said that the day of the rescue had been the most important day of his life. Nathaniel shook his head. He said the most important day was when he decided to help, before knowing what it would cost, before knowing what I would gain, the moment of choice. Everything that came after was a consequence of that choice. This is the story of Nathaniel Cross, a man who found a young man trapped in a canyon and decided to help, who lost everything in the rescue, your horse, your supplies, your plans. And that, by losing everything, he gained much more than he ever imagined. A family, a home, a life of purpose, decades of love. The rescue cost everything, and it was worth every penny. Because the things that really matter are not the ones we carry in our saddlebags. These are the ones we carry in our hearts.